The stars looked different from the Bridge of the Times singing wind asterisk. Captain Velrin had seen thousands of systems in his long career. But this sector of space felt empty and cold. His ship moved slowly through the darkness, scanning for anything interesting. The Vareth had been exploring the galaxy for thousands of years, and Velrin took pride in his work. "Captain, I'm picking up something strange," said his communications officer. The young Varath's voice carried concern. "It's a distress signal, very weak. The technology is primitive." Velrin moved to the scanning station. The screens showed a vessel drifting through space, trailing atmosphere and debris. It was crude by Varath standards, held together with basic materials and powered by fusion drives that belonged in a museum. But someone was alive on that ship, and they were dying. "How many life signs?" Velrin asked. 847, sir. Many of them are children." His second officer, Thorin, spoke up immediately. "Captain, our regulations are clear. We don't interfere with pre-contact species. These beings haven't developed proper space travel yet. We should observe and move on." Velrin studied the dying ship on his screen. He could see the damage clearly now. Something had hit them, probably a micrometeor they never saw coming. Their hull was breached in 3 places. Life support was failing. They had maybe 6 hours before everyone aboard suffocated. "They're heading toward that debris field," Velrin said quietly. "They'll be torn apart in 2 hours, if they don't change course. And they can't change course, because their engines are dead." "Sir, the rules exist for good reasons," Thorin pressed. "We can't just rescue every species we encounter. It changes their development. It interferes with their natural growth." Velrin thought about the rules. He thought about his duty. Then he thought about 800 lives, ending in the cold darkness of space. Many of them children who never asked to be on this journey. He made his decision. "Prepare rescue operations. I want teams ready to board that vessel. Get our engineers working on repairs, and someone figure out what kind of atmosphere they breathe before we open any hatches." The rescue took 4 hours. Varath teams moved through the damaged human ship with careful efficiency. The humans were terrified at first, seeing aliens for the first time in their lives, but fear turned to hope when they realized these strange beings were saving them. Velrin watched from his bridge as his crew worked miracles. They patched the hull breaches with temporary seals. They restarted the life support systems. They even managed to get the main engines working again, though it took some creative engineering. The Vareth were careful not to leave behind any technology the humans couldn't understand. They used the humans' own materials, their own designs, just applied with better knowledge. When the work was done, Velrin transported over to the human ship to meet their leaders. He found himself in a cramped corridor facing a tall human man with tired eyes and a strong handshake. "I'm Greg Hudson," the human said. "I lead this expedition. You saved our lives. All of us. We don't even know how to thank you." Velrin's translator made his words understandable. "No thanks are needed. We simply did what was right." A human woman stepped forward. She had grease on her hands and exhaustion in her face. "I'm Kate Morrison, Chief Engineer. Your people taught us things about our own systems we never knew. The way you fixed our plasma conduits, it's brilliant. You'll reach your destination now," Velrin said. He transmitted coordinates to their navigation system. "There's a habitable world 3 weeks from here. Good soil, clean water, reasonable weather. You'll do well there." 1. The humans wanted to give them something, anything, as payment for the rescue. But what could a primitive colony ship offer to an advanced civilization? They had nothing but hope and determination, and the few possessions they'd brought from their home world. That's when a small human child pushed through the crowd. The boy couldn't have been more than 10 years old. He had bright eyes and messy hair, and he held something in his hands. "Mr. Alien Captain?" the child said. Velrin knelt down to the boy's level. "Yes, young one? My name is Danny Price. My dad made this before he died, back on Earth. It's an eagle. That's a bird from our planet. They fly really high and they're really brave." The boy held out a small wooden carving, detailed and beautiful, despite its simple materials. I want you to have it. Because you were brave, and you saved us. Velrin took the carving carefully. It fit in his palm, smooth and warm from the child's hands. He didn't fully understand human customs or the significance of this gesture, but he understood the intent. This child was giving him something precious, something irreplaceable. I will treasure this, Danny Price, Velrin said, and I will remember you. The boy smiled and ran back to his mother. The other humans watched with tears in their eyes. Such a small gesture, but it meant everything to them. Velrin returned to his ship. The Times, singing, Wind Times departed, leaving the Times New Horizon Times to continue its journey. As they jumped back into faster-than-light travel, Velrin sat in his quarters holding the wooden eagle. He logged the encounter in his ship's records, noting the rescue and the species designation, human. He placed the eagle on his desk, where he could see it. Just a small, wooden bird from a primitive species. He had no idea that this simple act of kindness would matter decades later. He had no idea that humans remembered everything, especially those who helped them when they needed it most. The Times, New Horizon Times, reached the habitable world 3 weeks later. The colonists named their new home Providence, and they told the story of their rescue to every generation that followed. They told their children about the kind aliens who saved them. They told them about Captain Velrin and his crew. They told them that kindness matters, even among the stars, and young Danny Price grew up remembering the alien captain, who accepted his gift with such gentle respect. 70 years had passed since the rescue of the Times New Horizon *. Captain Velrin was now Fleet Admiral Velrin, one of the highest-ranking officers in the Verath military. His dark blue uniform carried medals from a dozen campaigns, and his face showed the lines of age and responsibility. But nothing in his long career had prepared him for the Krell. The war had started 18 months ago, far out on the galactic rim. The Krell swarm appeared without warning, a massive hive mind species that consumed everything in its path. They didn't negotiate. They didn't communicate. They simply arrived, attacked, and took what they wanted. Entire civilizations vanished in weeks. The Verath had fought back with all their advanced technology and ancient wisdom. It wasn't enough. World after world fell to the Krell. The swarm adapted to every weapon, overcame every defense, and kept coming with endless numbers. Billions of Krell ships moved through space like a plague, and behind them came silence. Now Velrin stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Times Eternal Wisdom *, watching his fleet hold the line at the threshold gates. This was the last major defensive position before the Krell reached the Verath core worlds. Behind him were billions of civilians who depended on this fleet for survival. In front of him were sensor readings that showed an enemy force 5 times larger than his own. "Admiral, we're receiving updated projections from Fleet Command," said his tactical officer. The young Verath looked worried. "The Krell will arrive in 72 hours. Our current forces won't hold them for more than 6 hours of sustained combat." "What about reinforcements?" Velrin asked, though he already knew the answer. "There are none, sir. Every available ship is already here, or defending other critical positions. Fleet Command suggests we may need to consider withdrawal." Withdrawal meant abandoning the threshold gates. It meant falling back to inner defensive lines. It meant sacrificing the outer colonies and billions of lives. Velrin had fought his entire career to protect those lives. The idea of abandoning them now felt like a betrayal. "Continue preparations for the defense," Velrin ordered. "We hold this line." His officers returned to their work, but Velrin could see the doubt in their eyes. They were Verath, a logical and philosophical people. They understood mathematics. 5 enemy ships for every one of theirs meant defeat. Pure and simple. No amount of courage or determination could overcome those odds. That evening, Velrin sat alone in his quarters. The walls were covered with mementos from his long career. Photographs of ships he'd commanded. Awards from grateful worlds. Artifacts from 100 different species. His eyes fell on a small wooden carving, sitting on a shelf. The eagle looked the same as it had 70 years ago. The wood had darkened slightly with age, but the craftsmanship remained beautiful in its simplicity. Velrin picked it up, remembering the human child who gave it to him. Danny Price. That was his name. The boy would be an old man now, if he was still alive. Velrin wondered what had happened to those humans. Did they make it to the world he'd recommended? Did they build a successful colony? Were they happy? He'd never followed up on the encounter. The Varath kept records, but one small rescue among thousands of missions didn't warrant continued observation. He set the eagle back on the shelf and returned to his command screens. The tactical situation hadn't improved. If anything, new Krell scout elements were probing his defensive lines earlier than expected. They were testing for weaknesses, looking for the best angle of attack. The Varath Council met in emergency session. Velrin attended via holographic link, his image appearing in the Great Chamber alongside the other military commanders. The debate raged for hours. Some council members insisted they hold every position, fight to the last ship. Others argued for strategic withdrawal, preserving their forces for a better defensive opportunity. "We are facing extinction," said Elder Morven, the council chair. "Our species has survived for 10,000 years. We must be wise now. We must think of survival, not glory. Survival without honor is just a slow death," Velrin replied. "Those colonies trust us to protect them. If we abandon them now, what are we?" The vote, when it came, was close. The council authorized Velrin to make the tactical decision on the ground. If withdrawal became necessary to save the fleet, he had permission to order it. The weight of billions of lives now rested on his shoulders alone. Far away from the threshold gates, on a planet called Providence, alarms began to sound. The Varath had sent out automated warning broadcasts to all inhabited systems in the region. The message was simple and terrifying. "The Krell are coming. Evacuate if possible." Providence had grown from a small colony to a thriving world of 2 million humans. They had farms and cities and families. They had built universities and hospitals and parks. Children played in streets named after the Times New Horizon Times and its crew. And in the central square of the capital stood a statue of Captain Velrin, holding a wooden eagle. Governor Danny Price sat in his office reading the Varath warning. He was 80 years old now, his hair white and his back bent with age. But his eyes were still sharp, and his memory was still clear. He remembered a kind alien captain who saved his life when he was just a boy. He remembered giving away his most precious possession. He remembered the gentle way Velrin accepted his gift. Danny called an emergency council meeting. The planet's leaders gathered in the government chamber, their faces grave. The Varath warning had been broadcast openly. Everyone on Providence knew about the threat. Fear was spreading through the population. "The Varath aren't asking for help," said his chief of staff. "They're just warning us to run." "I know," Danny said quietly. "But we owe them everything. Without them, none of us would be here." Lisa Morrison, the granddaughter of the Times New Horizon Asterisk's original chief engineer, stood up. She commanded Providence's defense forces, such as they were. "Governor, I've been reviewing our military capabilities. We have some armed vessels, mostly converted mining ships with weapon mounts. We have a few patrol craft. We have brave people, but we're not a military power. We can't fight in a war between space empires." Danny looked around the chamber at the faces of people he'd known his whole life. He thought about the statue in the square. He thought about the stories every child on Providence learned about the rescue. He thought about what it meant to be human. "Send messages to all the other human colonies in this sector," Danny said. "Tell them what's happening. Tell them about the Varath. And tell them we're calling in a debt. 70 years old." The message from Providence spread across human space, like wildfire. 37 different colonies received Danny Price's transmission. each one founded by or connected to the survivors of the time's New Horizon asterisk. The story of the rescue was part of their shared history, taught to every generation. Now that history was calling them to action. On the mining colony of New Perth, Administrator Colin Shaw read the message 3 times before calling his staff together. New Perth had a population of 500,000 people who worked the asteroid belts for valuable metals. They had tough mining ships with industrial cutting lasers and powerful engines. They were workers, not soldiers. "This is insane," said his operations manager. "We can't fight in an interstellar war. We mine rocks for a living." "The Verith saved the time's New Horizon asterisk," Colin replied. "Without that rescue, none of our ancestors would have survived. We wouldn't exist. That was 70 years ago. Ancient history. This isn't our fight." Colin looked at the faces around his conference table. He saw fear, which was reasonable. He saw doubt, which was understandable. But he also saw something else. Every person in that room had grown up hearing the story of Captain Velrin and his crew. They'd been raised to believe that kindness mattered, that debts should be paid, that humans took care of those who took care of them. "Put it to a vote," Colin said. "Every adult on New Perth gets to decide. Do we help or do we hide?" The vote took 2 days. The debate raged in homes and bars and meeting halls. Some people argued they had families to protect, lives to live, responsibilities that didn't include dying for aliens they'd never met. Others argued that humanity's reputation in the galaxy would be defined by this choice. What kind of species were they? The kind that abandoned their friends, or the kind that remembered? The vote came back 63% in favor of helping. It wasn't unanimous, but it was decisive. New Perth would send its mining fleet to fight. Similar votes happened on colony after colony. New Boston sent its patrol ships. Armstrong Station contributed its defense fleet. Riverside committed its converted cargo haulers. Not every colony voted yes, but enough did. On Providence, Lisa Morrison worked day and night preparing for departure. Her defense force had never been meant for real combat. They practiced drills and ran patrols and occasionally chased off pirates. Now they were preparing to face an enemy that had defeated one of the galaxy's most advanced civilizations. "We need to be realistic about this," said her second-in-command, Jake Murphy. He was a veteran of the mining fleets, tough and practical. "Our weapons are outdated. Our shields are basic. Most of our crews have never seen real combat. We're going to die out there." "Probably," Lisa agreed. She was checking weapon systems on the Times Danny's Eagle asterisk, Providence's largest warship. The ship had been named after the governor, a tribute to the man who'd given his wooden carving to an alien captain. "But we're going anyway." "Why?" Jake asked. "I mean, I know why. The debt and the honor and all that. But really, why are we doing this?" Lisa stopped working and looked at him. "Because if we don't, then that statue in the central square is a lie. Because every story we've told our children about kindness and loyalty would be just empty words. Because the Verith didn't have to save us, but they did anyway. And because sometimes being human means doing the right thing even when it's stupid." Jake nodded slowly. "Fair enough. I'll get the crews ready." Governor Danny Price watched the preparations from his office window. He was too old to make the journey himself, his body too weak for the stresses of space combat. But he could send others, and he could make sure they understood what they were fighting for. The day before the fleet departed, Danny visited the central square. He stood before the statue of Captain Velrin, looking up at the bronze face. The sculptor had captured something in that alien expression, a kindness that transcended species. The wooden eagle in the statue's hand gleamed in the sunlight. "I hope this is what you would have wanted," Danny said quietly to the statue. "I hope we're honoring your kindness and not just throwing our lives away." People gathered in the square that evening, thousands of them. They came to say goodbye to friends and family who were leaving on the ships. They came to witness history being made. They came to be part of something bigger than themselves. Lisa Morrison stood on a temporary stage, looking out at the crowd. She wore her uniform and carried the weight of command on her shoulders. Behind her, the crews of the Providence fleet stood at attention. "We're not soldiers," Lisa said, her voice amplified across the square. "We're miners and farmers and engineers and teachers. We're ordinary people about to do something extraordinary. The Vareth Empire is fighting for survival against an enemy we barely understand." They could have asked other, advanced civilizations for help. They could have called on species with powerful militaries. Instead, they sent us a warning to evacuate. They still think of us as the primitive species they rescued 70 years ago. She paused, letting that sink in. But we're not that species anymore. We've grown. We've built worlds and raised families. And we learned something from the Varath all those years ago. We learned that kindness matters. We learned that saving lives is more important than following rules. We learned that sometimes you help people simply because it's the right thing to do. The crowd was silent, hanging on her words. "Tomorrow we leave for the threshold gates. We don't know if we'll make a difference. We don't know if we'll survive. But we know we have to try. Because the Vareth showed us kindness when we needed it most. And a kindness shown to humans is never lost. We remember. We always remember." The crowd erupted in cheers and tears. Parents hugged their children. Partners held each other tight. Friends said goodbyes that might be permanent. But underneath the fear and sadness was something else. Something stronger. Pride. They were doing the right thing. And everyone knew it. The next morning, 214 human ships lifted off from 37 different worlds. They were a ragtag fleet of mining vessels, cargo haulers, patrol craft, and converted civilian ships. They carried crews who were mostly untrained for military combat. Their weapons were outdated, and their shields were basic. By any logical measure, they were sailing toward certain death. But they went anyway, because humans pay their debts. They went because 70 years ago, an alien captain made a choice to save lives instead of following regulations. They went because kindness deserves to be repaid, no matter the cost. And at the head of that fleet, the Times Danny's Eagle Times pointed its bow toward the threshold gates and jumped into hyperspace. Behind it, 213 other ships followed. They were going to war, knowing they might not return, but determined to stand with those who once stood for them. Admiral Velrin stood on the bridge of the Times Eternal Wisdom Times, reviewing his defensive positions for the 100th time. The Krell would arrive in less than 24 hours. His fleet was positioned as well as possible given their limited numbers. Every ship was at battle stations. Every weapon was charged. Every crew member knew that tomorrow might be their last day alive. "Admiral, we're detecting new jump signatures," said his sensor officer. Multiple contacts emerging from hyperspace at the outer marker. Velrin's stomach tightened. Were the Krell arriving early? He moved to the tactical display, ready to order his fleet to engage. But the signatures were wrong. These ships were smaller than Krell vessels, and they were emerging from a different vector entirely. "Identification?" he demanded. The sensor officer studied his screens, confusion clear on his face. "Sir, they're registering as human vessels. 214 ships just entered the system." Velrin froze. Humans? He'd barely thought about that species in decades, not since the rescue of the Times New Horizon times 70 years ago. What were humans doing in this sector? And why were there so many of them? A communication request came through. Velrin accepted it, and his screen filled with the image of a human male in a military uniform. The human looked young by their standards, maybe 40 years old, with determined eyes and a strong jawline. "This is Captain Paul Chen of the human vessel Times Danny's Eagle *, commanding the Providence Coalition Fleet. We're here to assist in the defense of the threshold gates." Velrin stared at the human captain, trying to process what he was hearing. "Captain Chen, I don't understand. How did you even know about the battle? And why would you bring your ships here?" Paul smiled slightly. 70 years ago, a Vareth captain named Velrin saved 847 human colonists from certain death. Among those colonists was my great-grandfather. We received your evacuation warning, Admiral. We're here to return the favor. The wooden eagle. Suddenly, Velrin remembered it all clearly. The dying colony ship, the frightened humans, the small boy who gave him a hand-carved bird. That boy's descendants were here now, bringing a fleet to help in a war that wasn't theirs. Captain Chen, I appreciate the gesture, but this is not your fight. The Krell are incredibly dangerous. Your fleet appears to be composed of civilian vessels with minimal military capabilities. I cannot ask you to sacrifice yourselves for us. Good thing you're not asking, Admiral. We're volunteering. Paul's expression turned serious. We know what we're up against. We know our ships aren't advanced. But we're here. And we're not leaving. So how about we stop arguing and start planning? Velrin's second officer, the same Thorin who had objected to rescuing the humans 7 decades ago, spoke up. Admiral, with respect, these humans cannot possibly make a difference against the Krell. Their technology is primitive. Their crews are untrained. Adding them to our formation will only complicate our defensive strategy. I'm aware of that, Thorin. Velrin looked at the tactical display, showing 214 new contacts. It was foolish. It was illogical. It was the most courageous thing he'd seen in his long career. Captain Chen, transmit your fleet roster and capabilities. We'll integrate you into our defensive plan. Over the next 12 hours, Vareth tacticians worked with human commanders to develop a coordinated strategy. The cultural differences became apparent immediately. The Vareth approached warfare with careful precision, calculating optimal firing solutions and defensive positions. The humans approached it like a bar fight, looking for any advantage no matter how crazy it seemed. Lisa Morrison transported over to the Times' Eternal Wisdom Times to coordinate tactics. She met Admiral Velrin in his strategy room, surrounded by holographic displays of the upcoming battlefield. The old Varath admiral studied her with curious eyes. You were on the Times New Horizon asterisk? He asked. My grandmother was. Kate Morrison, the chief engineer. She told me stories about you, my whole life. Velrin gestured to a display showing the human fleet composition. These mining ships with industrial lasers. They're not designed for combat. Odor. These mining ships, no sir, they're designed for cutting through asteroid rock. But rock or Krell hull metal, it's all the same to a mining laser. Lisa brought up her own tactical plan. We're not going to fight like you do, Admiral. We can't match Vareth precision or Krell numbers. So, we're going to fight like humans. She outlined a strategy that made the Varath tacticians visibly uncomfortable. Human ships would perform dangerous jump maneuvers that their navigators considered too risky. Mining vessels would close to point-blank range where their industrial tools could do maximum damage. Converted cargo haulers would ram Krell ships if their weapons failed. Everything was aggressive, risky, and borderline suicidal. This plan has a projected casualty rate of over 40%, said a Vareth tactical officer, horrified. Could be higher, Lisa agreed calmly. But it'll work. The Krell adapt to conventional tactics. They've fought dozens of species who all approach combat the same way. They've never fought humans before. They don't know how crazy we can be. Jake Murphy, commanding one of the mining ship squadrons, joined the planning session via hologram. He looked at the Varath officers and grinned. You folks ever heard of the strategy we call, hold my beer? I'm not familiar with that tactical doctrine, admitted a confused Vareth commander. It means watch this. You're going to love it. Or hate it. Usually hate it. Jake brought up a simulation, showing mining ships, performing a maneuver that involved cutting their engines, drifting on momentum directly into Krell formations, then firing all weapons while spinning. We did this once chasing pirates in an asteroid field. Nearly killed ourselves. But it worked. The Vareth watched the simulation with expressions mixing horror and fascination. These humans seemed to have no concept of self-preservation. They planned tactics that violated every principle of safe space combat. Their strategies had names like ramming speed and suicide run, and whatever happens, happens. But underneath the crazy tactics, Velrin saw something else. These humans understood what the Verath had forgotten over millennia of civilization. Sometimes winning required taking risks that logic said were unacceptable. Sometimes, survival meant being willing to sacrifice yourself for others. Sometimes the only way to beat a superior enemy was to be more unpredictable than they could handle. "We'll incorporate your tactics into the overall defensive plan," Velrin said finally. "You'll take the left flank. When the Krell engage our center, you'll hit them from the side with these unconventional maneuvers. We'll give them hell, Admiral," Lisa promised. As the meeting broke up, Velrin asked Lisa to stay behind. When they were alone, he opened a cabinet and removed a small wooden carving. The eagle looked the same as it had 70 years ago, perhaps a little more worn but still beautiful. "A boy named Danny Price gave this to me," Velrin said softly. "I've carried it with me ever since." Lisa's eyes widened. "The governor sent you a message. Danny Price is his name. He's 80 years old now, too frail to make the journey, but he wanted you to know that he never forgot your kindness." "I never expected payment for that rescue," Velrin said. "We know. That's why we're here." Lisa smiled. "Humans remember kindness, Admiral. We remember it forever, and we always pay our debts." Velrin set the eagle on his command console, where he could see it during the battle. A simple wooden carving from a child who became an old man, now sending warriors to repay a kindness shown generations ago. It was illogical. It was beautiful. It was the most human thing he could imagine. The Krell arrived exactly when predicted, emerging from hyperspace in a massive swarm that darkened the sensors. Thousands of bioships, grown rather than built, moved with perfect coordination controlled by a single hive mind. They looked like massive insects crossed with nightmares, all chitinous armor and weapon ports that glowed with hostile energy. Admiral Velrin watched them come on his tactical display. 5 Krell ships for every one of his. The mathematics were brutal and clear. By every calculation, the Verath fleet should last maybe 6 hours before being overwhelmed. But calculations didn't account for the 214 human ships now positioned on his left flank, waiting for their moment. "All ships, battle stations," Velrin ordered calmly. "Hold formation. Let them come to us." The Krell didn't waste time with communication or demands. They simply attacked, their swarm rushing forward like a living wave. The Verath fleet opened fire with precise, devastating volleys. Energy weapons carved through Krell bioships with clinical efficiency. The Verath were masters of defensive warfare, and their initial response was perfect. But the Krell adapted. They always adapted. Within minutes, their formations shifted to minimize the effectiveness of Verath weapons. Their shields adjusted to absorb energy attacks. They pressed forward relentlessly, sacrificing ships without hesitation because the hive mind didn't value individual units, only the collective victory. "Krell forces are concentrating on our center," reported the tactical officer. "They're trying to punch through our main defensive line." This was the moment. Velrin opened a channel to the human fleet. "Captain Chen, you are authorized to engage. Show them what humans can do." Fluzz. Paul Chen grinned on the communication screen. "With pleasure, Admiral. All human ships, execute attack pattern crazy." I repeat, pattern crazy. The human fleet broke formation and scattered. To Verath sensors, it looked like complete chaos. Ships moved in unpredictable vectors, seeming to ignore standard tactical doctrine entirely. But there was method in the madness. 12 human ships, including the Times Danny's Eagle Asterisk, activated their jump drives at point-blank range to the Krell formation. It was a maneuver that Verath scientists considered theoretically possible, but far too dangerous to attempt. Jumping to hyperspace required careful calculations and clear space. Doing it in the middle of a battle with enemy ships all around was insane. 4 of the 12 ships didn't survive the transition. Their jump fields intersected with Krell vessels, creating catastrophic explosions that destroyed both ships. But 8 ships emerged successfully inside the Krell formation, appearing among enemy vessels where they could do maximum damage. The times Danny's Eagle times opened fire at ranges measured in meters rather than kilometers. Every shot hit because missing was impossible at that range. Paul Chen's crew fought with fierce determination, their guns blazing continuously. Around them, the other 7 ships did the same, creating havoc in the carefully coordinated Krell swarm. Jake Murphy led his squadron of mining ships in a completely different direction. They cut their main engines and drifted on momentum into the Krell formation, spinning slowly to maximize their field of fire. Their industrial cutting lasers, designed to slice through solid rock, carved into Krell bioships with brutal effectiveness. "This is working better than I expected," Jake shouted over the communication channel. His ship shuddered as Krell weapons hit his shields. Of course, the dying horribly part is also working as expected. A Krell bioship latched onto his vessel with organic grappling tendrils. Instead of panicking, Jake did something no sane pilot would attempt. He activated his mining charges, explosive devices normally used to break apart asteroids while they were still attached to his ship. The explosion destroyed the Krell ship and nearly destroyed Jake's vessel. His shields collapsed and his hull breached in 3 places, but he was still flying, still fighting, and still laughing like a maniac. "Who needs shields anyway?" he yelled. "Shields are for people who plan to survive." Lisa Morrison commanded the converted cargo haulers, ships that had no business being in a military engagement. When their weapons proved ineffective against Krell adaptive shields, she ordered a tactic that made the Verath tacticians watching literally gasp in horror. "All cargo ships, ramming speed, target their command vessels." "Ma'am, that's suicide," one of her captains protested. "Yep, do it anyway." 6 cargo haulers accelerated to maximum speed and smashed directly into Krell command ships. The impacts were devastating. The cargo ships were destroyed instantly, but they took massive enemy vessels with them. Each collision removed a key node from the Krell hivemind coordination, creating temporary confusion in their formations. The Verath fleet, watching these insane human tactics, found their own courage renewed. If these primitive humans could sacrifice themselves so fearlessly, how could the ancient Verath do any less? Velrin's ships pressed their attack with new aggression, matching human ferocity with Verath precision. But the cost was terrible. Human ships exploded under Krell fire. Crews died by the hundreds. The casualty reports scrolling across Velrin's screen made his heart ache. These brave humans were paying in blood for their loyalty. Then the Krell did something unexpected. They sent boarding parties to the Verath flagship. Biosoldiers materialized through some kind of organic teleportation technology, appearing directly inside the Time's Eternal Wisdom asterisk. The Verath crew scrambled to repel them, but they were scientists and explorers, not soldiers. That's when human marines, transported over from the Time's Danny's Eagle asterisk, showed what humans were really capable of. Led by a tough woman named Amy Hughes, they met the Krell boarders in brutal close-quarters combat. No fancy weapons, no advanced technology, just humans with rifles and knives and absolute determination. Amy Hughes fought with savage efficiency, her team moving through the corridors of the Verath flagship like they'd done this 1,000 times. When her rifle ran empty, she used it as a club. When her knife broke, she used her fists. The Krell biosoldiers were fierce, but they'd never encountered human capacity for violence. "These things bleed just like anything else," Amy shouted to her squad. "Keep hitting them until they stop moving." Admiral Velrin watched the security feeds in amazement. The humans fought with a ferocity that bordered on terrifying. They protected the Verath crew members, taking wounds meant for others, throwing themselves between danger and the aliens they'd come to save. The battle raged for 6 hours, just as the predictions said. But unlike the predictions, the Verath line held. The human tactics, crazy and suicidal as they were, created chaos in the Krell formations that the hive mind couldn't adapt to fast enough. Every time the Krell adjusted to one strategy, the humans tried something even more insane. Then Varath reinforcements arrived from the core worlds. Fresh ships jumped into the system, their weapons charged and ready. The Krell, facing unexpectedly fierce resistance and now outnumbered, began to withdraw. Their swarm pulled back, retreating to regroup and reassess. The threshold gates held. In the aftermath, Admiral Velrin stood on the bridge of the Times Danny's Eagle Times beside Captain Paul Chen. The human ship was barely holding together, its hull scarred by weapons fire and patched with emergency repairs. Smoke drifted through the corridors. The crew moved with the exhaustion of people who'd given everything they had. "Final casualty report, sir," Paul said quietly. 86 ships destroyed. 31 more damaged beyond repair. We lost 42% of our fleet. "I'm so sorry," Velrin said, his voice heavy with grief. "You shouldn't have had to pay this price." "But we did pay it," Paul replied. "And we'd do it again. Because that's what humans do. We remember kindness. And we repay it, no matter the cost." The Varath Council convened an emergency session. The debate was brief. They formally requested a military alliance with humanity. The humans, numbered in mere millions across scattered colonies, had earned the respect of one of the galaxy's elder civilizations through their courage and loyalty. But more importantly, they'd reminded the Varath of something they'd forgotten over thousands of years of careful civilization. Sometimes, wisdom wasn't about caution and calculation. Sometimes it was about having the courage to do the right thing, even when the odds seemed impossible. Admiral Velrin returned to his flagship carrying the wooden eagle. He placed it on his command console, where everyone could see it. Within days, the story spread through the Varath fleet. The tale of a small human child giving his most precious possession to an alien captain. And 70 years later, that child's people coming to repay the kindness. On Providence, Governor Danny Price sat in his office reading the casualty reports. 42% losses. Friends and neighbors dead in a war light years from home. He wept for them, but he also felt pride. They'd done the right thing. They'd honored the rescue that saved them all. The war with the Krell wasn't over. More battles would come. More lives would be lost. But now, humanity and the Varath would face those challenges together. Bound by mutual respect and a simple truth that both species now understood. A kindness shown to humans is never lost. And the repayment might just amaze you.